Everyone, it's 10:30, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Jackson, and I'm with the Confidential Advocacy Program at OHSU. My pronouns are, I am one of our confidential advocates. And today we are joined, we're going to be speaking on supporting immigrant, refugee, and Latinx survivors, as well as immigration and law. Just to kind of go through our presenters, planners, as well as our disclosures. You can see here our speakers, planners, and presenters don't have anything to disclose today. And this lists everyone here that was involved either on the planning committee or is with the confidential advocacy program, as well as our speakers that are joining us here today. And just a little bit about the confidential advocacy program. At OHSU, we provide confidential support services to OHSU employees, students, and volunteers who've experienced any form of sexual misconduct, including harassment, sexual assault, intimate partner violence, stalking, relationship, dating violence, and other forms. And that's at OHSU or outside the university. So myself and our other confidential advocates can connect you with community and campus resources, as well as provide emotional support, help with safety planning, and even navigating reporting if that's something that a student or an employee decides that they want to move forward and do. We're happy to help provide additional support. And if somebody decides not to do that, we also provide support as well. And these are our CAP hotlines throughout the state of Oregon. So we have 5 OHSU campuses throughout the state of Oregon, where we have students on those campuses as well as employees. And so we have 24/7 hotlines that are staffed, and the numbers in Portland is 833-495-2277. Those last 4 digits are the same and spell out CAPS, and they're the same in all 5 campus locations. And the goal with our hotline is if you're not able to reach myself or another confidential advocate during regular business hours, it rolls over to another confidential advocate so they can answer your phone calls. And yeah, here are confidential advocates today. I already introduced myself. Jackson, again, my pronouns are they, them, theirs. And then Stacy with our program is answering the hotline, as well as will be answering your questions today. So anytime you want to reach a confidential advocate, which really can, for a lot of people at OHSU, that just might mean I need support in a confidential space and I don't know where to go. So just call our hotline if that's something that you encounter as an OHSU member, or if you know someone who does, that's an OHSU member, 833-495-2277. And yeah, Stacy is on the hotline today and during this presentation. And then you can also email questions to our capsupport@ohsu.edu line, which is typically where we receive hotline, or I guess outreach requests from people who are interested in our services but would rather reach out by email instead of through the phone, which is totally fine as well. And then Stephanie McClure can't be here today, but they're our program manager, and they're employed full-time at OHSU and have been running this program since it started. So yeah, feel free to reach out anytime you need support. And then also thank you so much to EdCom and Language Services for your help today. We were able to make ASL available with your help, as well as set up closed captioning, which unfortunately is still through this stream text platform. Well, we appreciate your patience as we navigate the texts and glitches of the webinar process through the pandemic. And so really appreciate you all being here. And thank you so much to EdCom and Language Services for keeping up. And thank you so much to our ASL interpreter for keeping up with us and all of our presentation changes going into today. So yeah, I mentioned a little bit more about CAP, or a little bit about CAP earlier, and here's a little bit of information on our mission in terms of centering the voices of those who've experienced misconduct. And a lot of what we're doing today is adding additional power to those voices through education, which is a big initiative of ours. A lot of what we also do is advocacy, empowerment. We connect survivors and we connect them to support resources, both in the community at OHSU and outside of OHSU. And yeah, a lot of our values come down to social justice, intersectionality, inclusion and equity, self-determination, as well as safety and health. It's a big part of having a confidential advocacy program at a program in an institution like OHSU is focusing on how we can truly take care of others' health and make healthcare goals of our patients our priority if we're taking care of our own health and our employees and our students' health at the same time. So yeah, there's a few projects that we've initiated primarily during the COVID-19 pandemic, and also to respond to a lot of our community's needs as we've continued hearing from voices who are often less heard at OHSU. And so we've tried to make some additional new ways of giving spaces to folks to access our services confidentially and have their voices heard at OHSU, as well as hopefully find empowerment in creating change, as well as just accessing a space for healing and support, like our trauma-informed yoga, which are held on Tuesdays around the lunch hour. And that allows people to just check in. And sometimes people join with their Zoom completely off. They'll use an alias. Other times people will just watch the recording later that evening or later in the week. So feel free to join us on Tuesdays if that fits your needs. And it is a certified trauma-informed yoga instructor that we've recruited and contracted for these. And then our Survivor Voices project, that allows our survivors to communicate the change that they want to see at OHSU and help us amplify their voices through creating that change and kind of help guide our program, as well as better connect with the change that we want to see. And then we also recently are working with our volunteers, as well as OHSU community members, to create an advisory council that will amplify Black, Indigenous, and people of color voices, or voices of people of color at OHSU, as well as LGBTQIA plus individuals and those with who are living with disabilities at OHSU. So the goal is the advisory council, and our program manager, Stephanie, has made this very clear, and that the goal of the advisory council is to guide the work that the CAP staff and volunteer does. It's not to ask these folks to do any work themselves. It's generally just to have a space where people can have their voices heard and can help guide us on how to align our work to best create change within OHSU and make sure that we're representing the voices that need to be heard. And then we also have a team of volunteers that is growing, and is our wonderful Hillary Tam with our team is doing great work with our volunteers and connecting them with the program. And we also encourage people, especially students who are interested in learning about what survivor services look like, or what it looks like to truly support individuals who are working through trauma and also trying to function, and what it means to do a lot of that hard work. Anybody like that who wants to get connected and learn how our program operates in order to do this type of work, and how we communicate and implement partnerships with the communities and community resources and partnerships like the ones we have here today. So yeah, feel free to reach out if you'd like to volunteer with us as well. So capsupport@ohsu.edu, which is the email you're going to email your question to, which I know you're all going to come up with one at least. or yeah, our hotline, 833-495-2277, or CAPS. You can call us or email us for any information on these projects. And yeah, just another reminder to submit questions for our presenter to capsupport@ohsu.edu. Stacy's monitoring the inbox, and Stacy and I are going to work together to read these questions to the presenters during the Q&A at the very end. So if you have questions for Sue or Marie during their portion of the presentation, while that will come after the second half of the presentation, just go ahead and email them to us, and we'll hang on to those to the end. And if you need additional support, please do call our hotline at any point throughout the presentation or another time, 833-495-2277. And when I say additional support, I just want to make sure it's clear that during our webinars, a lot of times we might be talking about victim services or working with survivors of trauma, and that could include yourself or someone you know, or an experience that you've had with a patient or someone you're close to. And sometimes that can bring up things. And so just know that if you have emotions or anything like that that catches you off guard, or you need any support whatsoever, feel free to just call us, and Stacy's on the other line, or on our hotline, and is happy to offer support in whatever way that looks like for you. Cool, and I will briefly introduce our first two presenters who are here today with IRCO. I'm excited to hear from both of them. Sue Vu is with us, and I'm excited to hear that Sue is actually a former student from OHSU PSU School of Public Health, and had a special interest in global health and working specifically with minority culture diverse populations, and worked as a public health educator, became involved in culture education and diversity training, and that brought her to Refugee and Immigrant Family Strengthening Program at IRCO, where she became a family strengthening advocate at Asian Family Center. And coming from a cultural background, understanding the language and culture barriers in healthcare and domestic violence and sexual assault, Sue's primary goals have come to closing the gaps and helping the community overcome those barriers. So I hope I did a good job of reading through your profile, Sue, and introducing you. But yeah, we're really hear from both Sue and Marie. Marie Abijuru has been working with IRCO since 2007 in several different positions, and started working as a domestic violence advocate in 2011 with African immigrant and refugee survivors, and then moved to the Department of Human Services at Multnomah County District 2 as IRCO's co-located DV advocate from 2013 through now, serving DHS clients that self-disclose as DV and SA survivors. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Marie and Sue, and I hope I did a decent job of introducing both of you. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having us, and you did an amazing job for introductions. I don't think I have anything else to say or add. My name is Sue Vu, and I'm an advocate at Refugee and Immigrant Family Strengthening, located at the Asian Family Center, which is also a part of IRCO. And be here with me today is my coworker, Marie. Marie? Are you here, Marie?
You hear me?
Yes, I hear you now.
Yes, my name is Marie Abijuru. Thank you for having us. As you did introduction, I don't have that much to add. I'm a domestic violence advocate and case manager at the Refugee and Immigrant Family Strengthening, DIFS, a domestic violence program of IRCO. I'm also co-located to different DHS offices in Multnomah County to serve whoever self-disclosed as a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. IRCO stands for Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization and was founded in 1976. Its mission is to promote the integration of refugee, immigrants, and the community at large into self-sufficient, healthy, and inclusive multi-ethnic society. Since IRCO began, many more programs have been added, and IRCO has now more than 200 programs, including RIFs for domestic violence. Why RIFs? How RIFs connected with domestic violence? It was a move forward for IRCO to think about domestic violence program back in 1998. Domestic violence was happening among immigrant and refugee families, and the survivors needed the support from people who could understand their culture and speak their language. But it was risky to name the program domestic violence. They named the program in a positive way, family strengthening, not trying to break families apart as many think when survivors are removed from an abusive home or the abusers are arrested. They didn't see the good part of the program to provide information about domestic violence, safety planning, resources, and to provide long-term case management services when it's needed. This mission is the Refugee Immigrant Family Strengthening Program. We support and empower immigrants, refugee, and undocumented survivors experiencing domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. We are committed to strengthening families through education, community partnership, direct services, and advocacy using cultural appropriate strategies to ensure violence is not accepted or ignored. And we are accessible 24/7 through our hotline, which is 503-445-1446.
Thank you, Marie. A really great introduction of our program. So we're gonna go into our main topic today. So these are the topic discussions that we have today. First is what is domestic violence and what is sexual assault. The reason why we bring it up, this definition again, just to kind of remind people that everybody, every culture has a really different definitions of what is it, and it's always good to remind people. Cultural role in supporting domestic violence and sexual assault survivor, barriers working with DV&SA immigrant and refugee survivors, different practice while working with DV&SA immigrant and refugee survivors, and some resources. So first, let's go in the definitions of domestic violence and sexual assault.
Yeah, domestic violence can be named, like when we say domestic violence is abroad, because it has there's different type of domestic violence. But in general, domestic violence, also called intimate partner violence, IPV, or domestic abuse or relationship abuse, is a pattern of behavior used by one partner to maintain power and control over another partner in an intimate relationship. In domestic violence, the abuser uses violence as a means of controlling. There is always unequal power in abusive relationship. For sexual assault, we call a sexual assault when there is any unwanted sexual activity without consent, including rape, incest, sexual harassment, and molestation. Consent is the presence of a clear yes, not absence of no. sexual assault perpetrators are motivated by the need to control, humiliate, and harm the victims. In sexual assault, the mutual consent is very important in sexual relations, and both parties have to express to each other what they want. For example, saying yes to intercourse does not automatically mean that you consent or say yes to have oral sex. That is why consent is very, very important in sexual relations.
And as we all know, there are many types of abusing. It can be physical, it can be financial, economic, it can be sexual, it can be verbal or emotional, it can be mental or psychological, or a really important thing that we want to highlight here is type of abuse for cultural identity. For example, like not allowing the victim to practice their religion belief or their cultural belief, or doing any cultural practice. And some example of this type of abuse, specifically with immigrant and refugee survivor that we have seen when we were working with the survivor. For example, like emotional or verbal abuse, it can be isolating isolating them from the community, telling the family that everything she said, as they said, is lie, calling them with racist name, causing them to lose face in front of people. With financially or economic abuse, it can be forcing them to work illegally when they don't have a work permit, or report them to immigrant authorities if they work under the table, not letting them getting a job or training. It can really easily happen, especially when the survivor just came to United States without any knowledge about the community, the work here, and with the language barrier.
There is immigrant-related type of abuse. As abusers of immigrants, a spouse and intimate partner often use immigration status-related abuse to lock their victim abusive relationship. For immigrant victims, this form of power and centrality is particularly malicious and effective. The fear induced by immigration-related abuse makes it extremely difficult for the victim to leave her abuser, obtain protection order, call the police for help, or participate in the abuser prosecution. Let's say, like, if you are immigrant here, because of the barriers of language, of culture, the abuser, as we say, we saw that there is always power and control. The abuser threatening to report the victim and children to the Department of Homeland Security. They might be have fear or be threatened to for the abuser to turn them to the Department of Human Security for deportation. Or sometimes when they come here as a fiance, or even when they come here as to join their partner, and they are not citizen, they might have fear that to be deported, or to do not have a job. Or sometimes they keep them in a house, and they cannot share information with other people. Not giving the survivor the access to documents that she needs for application for immigration status, training to telling immigration, like they lied before they come here, or taking their document away, or telling them that if you do this, we're gonna harm some family member back home. All those are the type of abuse they can experience, and if they cannot access those services because they are scared, they are afraid, and or they don't even know anybody they can call for help.
So as I had mentioned earlier about some example of cultural abuse specifically, there can be many factors that, you know, important and influence the risk of survivor, but the culture and ethnicity is a significant influence on especially how the victim respond to the abuse. With a lot of culture, the survivors tend to be more like what they will hold it on. They will, because of the family, they will try to keep it peace and not doing anything. Or with some culture, abusing or fighting like that is something considered as a norm, as normal. With some culture, it's more like, no, I have to go stand up and fight for my right. So it can be really, really different between culture and also just between different victims. Everybody have their own thought and their own way to respond to the abuse. Especially here when it's come to LGBTQT community, it's a little bit difficult, especially with immigrant and refugee. One threatening that I have seen a lot is threatenings to out someone as LGBTQ and T if their friends and family don't know. It has been happening a lot, and I have heard it from so many advocates. And in the immigrant and refugees, as you know, some culture is not that accepting like in America. And as Marie has mentioned, isolating someone who doesn't speak the dominant language where they live is extremely, extremely important. Most of the survivors, they didn't come to help earlier or hesitate to seek for help is because of their language barrier. And a lot of misusing tradition and practice and expectation of spiritual or cultural communities to which the victim belong as a means of normalizing and suppressing the abusive behavior, silence the victim, or preventing the victims from seeking support and help. I have heard a lot of norm that, you know, you're not supposed to talk out to people. You're not supposed to share the family story with other people.
And in domestic violence situation for immigrant and refugee community, we see the cultural impacts. Let's say male privilege. Male privilege, the man is the head of the household, and the women need to respect him no matter what. We know that in some country or some cultures, women are considered as property of the man and or in the in-law. But it doesn't mean they have not felt psychologically and physical pain, but they have to accept that because the culture says so. There's also a victim blame. It is the victim's fault that conflict happen, or if you are a divorced woman, you are disapproval in the community, the shame of to your family. Some cultures are overwhelming, and they pressure or force the woman to endure violence and abuse because it's accepted. And domestic violence is not a cultural value. We know, but some culture can see that as a family style. there's also the norm. DV is considered as a normal part of relationship, or sometimes they define it as a conflict. Cultural gender norm of women role in caretaking in home, or don't let other people in your business. In some culture, when there is a violence, because it's a taboo in some culture, they don't want to disclose that. They don't want anybody to know what's going on in the household. And also, some they depend on the religious community leaders, where they can think like, we're gonna pray, we're gonna do mediation, let's take care of this, and it's not going to happen again. When we know the violence is the power and control, it's not going to change overnight, or because the community leaders or friend or family come and talk to the abuser. And also, most of the survivors, they think about the children. Maybe if I leave, I cannot leave my children behind. Or if something happened, they can take my children away from me. Also trust. In some religious, women's voice are not valued, and therefore they concern that they will not be trusted. I already talked about that a little bit. Because survivors, they get trapped in the in abusive relationship, because they feel like disclosing that, let's say, example, to the church where they worship, it will be not good for their family. And they survivors try to protect the abuser, or to do not raise the voice, or even thinking like, if I say to this, because the abuser, they can be charming, polite, nice to other people outside, and they get like, if I say this, nobody gonna trust me, because this person is nice to everybody else outside.
So yeah, so talk all about that, bringing this to this slide is the barrier that working with domestic violence and sexual assault immigrant refugee survivor. First of all, yeah, we all see the culture and especially also the previous experience in home country that they may have suffered. The language barrier is a really big one. Fear of removal and family separation. Practical barriers like all the other survivors also experience. It's harder for the immigrant and refugee as they don't have that community here. They don't know the language, so it's harder for them to understand and assess these, and they also don't know their rights. Immigration legal status and economic. So next I will talk about some barriers, especially with cultural difference while working with professionals and trust in authority. So like, for example, the lack of mental health knowledge is a really important thing. In some culture, like for example, my culture, it doesn't exist, or it is a shame to go to mental health hospital. So that is when we're trying to like ask the survivor to, maybe we should seek help from a psychologist. They may help you to make you less confused about the situation right now. But I sometimes have to use a different word as counseling and explain to them as, this is just a person who you talk to, confidentialities, and, like just sharings, and they have knowledge in this. It takes more time to explain to them what is the mental health knowledge, and even that, some people still hesitate to seek for that help. Fear of going to hospital. In some other country, hospital is not that nice experience like America and US. It's maybe harder for them, and they just don't have that trust. Same with doctor and professional. consider that the doctor and professional are holding higher value and special knowledge. They may hesitate to make questions or opening to the doctor when they first come to them. That is make it really hard to communicate. It already has a language barrier, and now it's just gonna make more and more barrier. The trust in authorities is like there's a lot of cases that we have seen in survivor of domestic violence, also immigrant and refugee, that they are concerned to file report. They are concerned to call the police. They are concerned to file any like restraining order or protective orders. Is the real thing is the trust in authorities. They so police authority, corruption, and military crackdown are a part of their personal history. Trauma, displacement, relocations, suffering from racism at an early age if they become immigrant and refugee at a really young age. Nobody believed them. Survivors will learn that nobody in America will believe them as they are limited to learn English. They cannot seek help, communicate with anybody. It doesn't sound realistic as like it doesn't really sound applicable to us, but it's actually happening. They may not be able to say it out like I don't trust them because they don't trust me or this, but that is what they've been holding and thinking.
Language access is a huge barrier to immigrant and refugee survivors because the limited English proficiency often prevent women or survivors from approaching mainstream providers who don't speak their language or lack of cultural understanding and sensitivity from provider who don't understand them. This happened even to our program. Sometimes when we have someone who came from the country where there is nobody in the office to assist them. But the good thing in our program, we have different advocates from different culture of Asia, South America, Africa, South Middle East, Eastern European, and we speak more than 15 languages. But sometimes we have some survivors who speak the dialect, even if like we came from the same continent, we cannot understand. One thing in the language, we use the translation. IRCO has language bank, international language bank. We can provide interpretation services. Or if they don't have that language, we use outside interpretation company. But when there is nobody in crisis situation, there is no manner we have to apply to communicate with those survivors. Just be polite and formal, because many cultures place importance on formality, especially in a situation they may feel shameful or fear to asking a stranger for help. Another thing is important to avoid speaking loudly, because when someone doesn't understand, the speaker may raise his or her voice. In some culture, they may think the speaker is angry, or sometimes they can be it can be a trigger to some people, because you speak loudly thinking like they're gonna understand. Maybe they're gonna think something else, can escalate their fear. And also avoid to use the slangs, because some phrases may be confusing because the word have other meaning. As I said, we have advocates from different cultures, speak different languages. We try to translate some document we use in our office. And also in the language, we have even on languages or other services, we have to practice trauma-informed care. There's sometimes a participant came with their children, want them to translate for them. And the children don't have experience of being interpreter or don't know the meaning of the word, like to explain any details. And also, is the trauma, the children are gonna be traumatized to hear the situation of what's going on between the parent. And parents might not think about that. It's good to just to explain to them, like children cannot be allowed to be interpreter for their mom or their father based on the trauma children are gonna experience on the top of what they witness at home. Also, the participant might not tell the details what happened because she wants to protect that child, and they're gonna be missing information, and the services we're gonna provide will be not really be enough or accurate to the situation she's going through. Yeah. And also for immigration, there is always fear to deportation. Fear to deportation because of immigration status. The threat of being turned to the immigration authority and subsequently pressed in a removal proceeding. We mentioned a little bit about how survival when they are here, they don't have a document. Maybe let's say someone came here as a student, the visa expired and she lives with the partner or the boyfriend and threatened to deport them. And themselves, even they are saying, even I am in domestic violence, I cannot seek for help because I'm gonna be in the risk to be deported, which is sometimes can be true depending on who is the abuser is. And when we know we have a referral for someone who is in type of not having the legal document, we are not the lawyer, we connect them with immigration services. And IRCO now has immigration services where we can refer our participant, and sometimes we refer them to Catholic Charity as well. So, and also, when there is that issue with the deportation, the abuser threatened them to report them. The abuser can ask them to do not work and stay home. The abuser can be home without accessing other services they might benefit, and that will increase the violence and other crises, because in some cases, some children might be qualified for some benefit, but because they are scared of being deported, they are going to be scared to seek for help.
So yeah, this is just a summarized slide of what we should do on in all of this culture and barrier and immigration status barrier. It's always good to listening and understanding carefully. it's really hard for a person to open at the really beginning. But even if we have questionings, always just keep listening more. Ask question if you can, and it might take time. But a thing that I always learning from all of this culture barrier or status barrier is never jump into assumptions. A person we don't understand the full story of a survivor, their immigration status, their culture barrier, their children barrier, or financial barrier that they may have been through. And I believe that a well-trained interpreter working with specific domestic violence and sexual assault immigrant and refugee survivor would be a really great options, or building a strong connections between other domestic violence or sexual assault program with the culture advocate program. I will try to go fast as we are running out of time, but this is a slide about the situations right now during COVID-19. Marie, do you want to talk about this?
Yes.
Really fast.
During this COVID-19, it's very, very hard for the survivor to access services. As you know, we are all trapped in a house, and that is what the abuser want, to keep control on them. It's hard. The services we are providing are over the phone, and it's very, very hard to talk to us or to call even to call 911 when it's needed, because the abusers are there. And when they reach us, it's hard to get the details of the situation. And also they cannot move to their cousin, their friend, because, you know, everybody has to stay in their own home. The big issue in this COVID-19 is safety, how to keep them safe, and also how to provide appropriate services while they are stuck in home with the abuser. It's a very, very crucial time, but we are trying our best to use some, just like when we have the chance to talk to them, we can figure out how to provide those services, or to find a good time. They can let us know when it's a good time to reach them.
Thank you. So this is just a few slides about resource, and I believe that this presentation is shared with everybody. So I just go through it really quick. This is a culture-specific resource. So each culture may have a really different program, and if you have any survivor with culture-specific need, these are some cultures that are available. And then there's also resource bank, code to safety. We all know map by benefit. With map by benefit, you can check whether the immigration status of that person will be able to get that benefit or not. And this is information about REEF program, that what we provide crisis interventions, culture advocacy, resource in housing, and we also can refer people to our legal department in IRCO. And this is our REEF hotline. Thank you so much for having us. And if you have any questions, please send it to the host. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you for your time and expertise and for sharing with us. And thank you to IRCO as well for, just being a great community partner. I really appreciate working with you all the few times we intersect in this work. So yeah, thanks for everything you do and for going through all of those services. Next, we're going to hear from Sarah Purce with Catholic Charities. Sarah Purce is the Assistant Director and Rural Program Coordinator for Catholic Charities. Oh, and real quick, I should mention, if anybody does have questions for Sue and Marie, I just want to reiterate, please send those to Stacy at CAP Support, at CAPSUPPORT, CAP Support at OHSU.edu. So yeah, just send your questions to Stacy on our team there, and we'll be sure and get to those. If we don't get to them at the end, please know that's just because we're trying to prioritize our speakers' time with us today and fit in as much of this content as we can. And we will work with the speakers instead to get you your answers and follow up with everyone by email. So just send us those questions regardless, and we're going to do the best we can to fit it all in. capsupport@ohsu.edu. Yeah, Sarah with Catholic Charities Sarah's been working as an immigration attorney since 2009 and is the Assistant Director and Rural Program Coordinator for Catholic Charities Immigration Legal Services. Her work focuses primarily on representing immigrant survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. And Sarah received her undergraduate degree from Western Washington University and graduated cum laude from American University Washington College of Law in 2009. Sarah is a member of the Washington State Bar Association, Oregon State Bar, and is on the executive committee of the Oregon chapter of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Sarah also serves as the chair for the Oregon Department of Justice's Immigrant Crime Victim Rights Subcommittee and is a member of the Oregon DOJ Labor Trafficking Task Force, as well as a member of the Oregon Foreign-Born Human Trafficking Task Force. Thank you for all your hard work for our communities, Sarah. This is excellent, and we're really excited to hear from you. Thank you for being here today. And I will turn it over to you. You're still on mute.
Do I?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay, thank you. All right, hi, I'm Sarah from Catholic Charities Immigration Legal Services. I am going to quickly kind of go through this. I wanted to talk about some forms of immigration relief that are available to survivors of abuse and serious crime. That's Catholic Charities, that's where we are, that's who I am. So part of our program gets a grant from the Federal Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women to provide free immigration legal services to rural survivors of intimate partner violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse, and stalking. And so if a survivor lives in or was victimized in an area that is rural in Oregon, we can do a free immigration consultation with them. And if they're eligible for a form of relief, we are able to help them with their case for free. Our office also has general services that are open to folks who live all over Oregon, but most of our clients for our general program are more in the metro area. So what is rural Oregon? The gray counties are fully rural counties in Oregon, so it's most of Oregon. So if somebody has been survived of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, child sex abuse in any of these counties, we can do, and they have immigration questions, we can do a free consultation with them. So basically, I'm going to quickly do a quick overview of immigration law. It's not an area of law that folks are usually very familiar with if they haven't personally interacted with it. And so just a general overview so you can understand where these forms of relief come in. And then I'll go through the different forms of relief that are available to survivors of crime and abuse. I'll give some details on those, obviously not so trying to make everyone an expert in these, but if you come into contact with somebody who doesn't have status or has questions about immigration status and they're a survivor of crime or abuse, it's good to be able to suggest to them that they might be able to be eligible for something based on that. And then just information about how to refer people to legal services. And then at the end, we're all going to answer all of your questions if you've sent them. So very generally, there's lots of different ways to immigrate to the U.S. The one people are most familiar with are usually family-based immigration, where somebody who has status here is applying for a family member either here or outside of the country. But there's also political asylum, which is, they're trying to do some damage to that right now. But there's also self-petitions under the Violence Against Women Act, special immigrant juvenile status, U visas for victims of crime. There's also temporary visas, so people who have employment visas or student visas or visitor visas. Those are all ways to enter the country legally. And then there's also certain forms of relief for folks who are in the process of being removed, that they can apply for something, and then that would gain them status in the U.S. but this is what it feels like, regardless of which one of those forms, one of those ways you're going. It is a very complicated system. I've been doing this for 10 years and it's changing all the time. It's very complicated. And so I just like to point that out to people. It takes years in some cases. And it just really depends on really specific facts of each person's situation, what they may or may not be eligible for. So different categories of people in the US. So the United States citizens, either you're born in the US or you have US parents, or you naturalize, you apply to become a US citizen. We call those USCs because we love acronyms, attorneys. Lawful permanent residents, often called green card holders or LPRs. And then those are people with permanent permission to be in the United States forever. And then there's people with other kinds of lawful status. The temporary status, as I was mentioning earlier, tourists, students, U visas, T visas, temporary visas. There's asylees and refugees. DACA is not an actual status, but it's a temporary permission to remain and not be sought for removal proceedings. And there's undocumented people. Either they entered without authorization or they were here, entered lawfully, and then that status expired. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the family-based immigration system because that is just the most common, and it's also the basis for some of these forms of relief that I'm going to talk about later for survivors of crime and abuse. So the family-based process is basically there's either a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident who has status, and they file a petition for their family member, and that's the first step. And then the second step is that family member applies to immigrate either inside of the U.S. by adjusting their status, by sending in an application that then allows them to be a lawful permanent resident, or they either are outside of the country or they leave the country and come in via an interview at the U.S. consulate. So the time between step 1 and step 2 varies greatly depending on many factors. These are the folks that U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents are eligible to apply for. You can see that both can apply for their spouse, both can apply for unmarried children, which means that they're unmarried and under 21 in the immigration context. That's the definition of children. They both can apply for adult sons and daughters, but U.S. citizens can apply for parents and siblings, and lawful permanent residents cannot. The system that determines how long it's going to take between the first step of that process and the second step of that process is called the preference system. And this is Congress designated different groups of those family relationships and gave them different preference. And they are they're given preference depending on the relationship between the petitioner and the beneficiary, what the country they're coming from, and the status of the petitioner. And so these are the different preferences. Obviously, this is not something everybody needs to know, but this is just sort of how it's set up. If somebody's applying for a family member, and say somebody's applying for their spouse or unmarried child, they would be 2A. So that's just sort of the first preference is unmarried children over 21 of U.S. citizens. The second preference is spouses and unmarried children under 21 of lawful permanent residents, unmarried children over 21 of lawful permanent residents, and married children of USCs, sisters and brothers of USCs. So they all have to wait in line after that first step is taken to be able to take the second step to become lawful permanent residents, to either come in through the consulate or apply here in the country, depending on their history. And this chart, and I don't know if parts of this are covered up with boxes, but essentially this chart is put out every month to tell people when they can take that second step. And you can see across the top that it's divided out by countries, and the 4 listed countries are the countries that have the most people applying to come in. And then down the side, you can see that is the preference categories. So for example, if somebody is the brother of a US citizen, and that would be the bottom row, F4, the brother or sister of a US citizen, and they were born in Mexico. So then you go over to the Mexico column, and the date that is in that box tells you when you're able to take the second step. And so the date that's in that box is the date that your first application was approved. So if somebody applied for their brother in June of 1998, then they are now eligible to take the second step. And so you'll see, you know, somebody applied for their unmarried child over 21. That's that first row from Mexico. They've been waiting since December 1997 to take that second step. And you can see that some of the dates are faster, you know, unmarried children over 21 from China, 2015. Still a really long wait, but not as long as if you some of the other categories. So that's just the basis. The C means that that category is current. So if you're the spouse or the unmarried child under 21 of a lawful permanent resident, then you can take the second step right after the first step, but everybody else has to wait. And this chart comes out every month telling people who have been waiting for years and years when they're able to take the next step. It's very complicated and annoying, and it's not something people need to understand, but it's good to just understand that this family-based petition system is very limited to those people that I listed. There's not, you know, people can't apply for cousins or grandparents or nieces or nephews or anybody except for the people who are on that list. And then there are also these long, incredibly long wait times. And so, for example, the F1 status, the brother or sister of a US citizen, if that person applied, those people who applied in 1998 are just now becoming eligible. But since 1998, people have been getting in that line. And so there are estimates that if you applied today for that category, that it would take like 150 years for that next step to come to be able to get that actual steps. So how does this play into what we're talking about today? So a lot of this was discussed previously by the speakers before me, who did a great job, because I'm going to try and speed through some of this stuff. And so kind of explaining the power and control that exists in those intimate partner violence relationships or domestic violence relationships, and how that works, especially for immigrant and refugee communities. And the way that it works in immigration law is that it's sort of baked in that there is an added layer of power and control in this system. So there's no benefit to having that first application filed for you. It doesn't give the person any status. It doesn't allow them to work. And so it just holds their place in line. So depending on how long it takes for their date to come up on that chart, that can be a long time where they're waiting and they have no status and they're completely sort of at the mercy of the person who has applied for them. Which is, you know, fine if it's not an abusive relationship, but if there's abuse there, if power and control is being used, that's an excellent tool for holding control over the abused person. And so also that first step, the petition belongs solely to the petitioner. So they can withdraw it at any time, and the relationship has to be intact for them to take the second step. So if you imagine that someone is in an abusive relationship, with their spouse who has status and they don't, the spouse can threaten to take away the status at any time, or if they want to leave their abusive partner, they can't without losing access to this immigration benefit. So that's sort of just an additional layer of power and control that's baked into the immigration system on top of all of the other barriers, which I'm going to talk about a few, but we covered those. So these are the additional obstacles for immigrant survivors. A lot of these were covered previously. Language and cultural barriers, resources don't meet cultural needs. We work with a lot of, all of our clients are in rural areas of Oregon. So in addition to cultural isolation, there's literal physical isolation, which goes into what was mentioned before with transportation, ability to access services. A perception of law enforcement is a huge one. If someone comes from a country where police are not there to help you, they're more likely to hurt you. It's unlikely that someone's going to call the police or reach out for help if they're being abused or controlled. Fear of deportation is a huge one, or returning to the home country, but I think the biggest one that we hear is fear of losing children. Survivors that we work with are constantly told they're going to, I have status, you don't. If you call the police, I get the kids, you get deported. And that's a huge area, and that's a huge source of control over the survivor. And so what are some of the remedies? So immigration remedies for victims of abuse and crime. So there are a number of things that are in place to help survivors of abuse, sexual assault, stalking, all of these things. And they're specifically for immigrant survivors. VAWA, the ones in bold are the ones I'm going to speak to in more detail, but it's just sort of to give you an idea that there are many forms of relief for survivors, immigrant survivors, and if you come in contact with somebody who you think might be eligible or interested in one of these, to refer them, because even there are things that aren't even listed on here. So VAWA self-petitions, U visas for victims of serious crime, T visas for victims of trafficking, special immigrant juvenile status. There's gender-based asylum, cancellation of removal under the Violence Against Women Act, and then waiver, I-7151 waivers based on abuse. So luckily, the USCIS, who is the part of immigration where applications are sent for these types of relief, has specially trained units that work with these types of cases, these humanitarian applications for survivors of abuse and crime. And they get special training on what are the different forms of abuse that are. So immigration recognizes many different forms of abuse. It's not just physical violence. Emotional, obviously physical, but also sexual, economic control, intimidation and threats, social control, stalking, manipulation of children, and more. And so it's not just the physical violence, but if you show the different ways in which the survivor has been abused, that can help them apply for the form of relief. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the Violence Against Women Act self-petition. So this allows certain abused family members of U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents to petition for themselves as though their abusive family member were applying for them. It says Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, but obviously this applies to men who are abused as well. Men and boys, everyone. It's anybody who is a family member of an abusive U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident. So this is Congress's effort to recognize that this immigration system had these tools of power and control sort of baked in, and make sort of an escape valve, essentially, for a relief valve for folks who are in these relationships that are abusive. So it allows severe survivors of abuse and battery to petition for themselves as though their abuser were applying for them. So if they are married to somebody who would be eligible to apply for them, they can then apply for themselves confidentially and secretly without their abuser knowing. And it's a different form, but that's not really important. So who qualifies? The abused spouse of a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident, the non-abused spouse of a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident who has whose child has been abused by the U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident spouse, even if it's a child from a previous relationship. If they're married to somebody who has this status and they're abusing their child, that person is then eligible. If you're the abused child of a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident, or if you're the abused parent of an adult U.S. citizen son or daughter, you're also eligible. And we've seen all of these different kinds of cases. The requirements: there has to be battery or extreme cruelty. Battery is what it sounds like, it's physical violence, but extreme cruelty is all of those other types of abuse that I mentioned, the financial abuse, emotional abuse, all of those things have taken together rise to the level of extreme cruelty. The person is eligible for a VAWA self-petition, even if there's been no physical violence. And that is not anybody else's job. Like, that is the attorney's job to determine if they meet that requirement. That's not something, but if anybody suspects that they've come into contact with somebody who might meet some of these, refer them, and we'll determine if they meet the standard of extreme cruelty. They have to have the qualifying relationship. The abuser has to be a spouse or a parent or the child of a USC or the parent of a USC. And the abuser, so they have to be legally married. If it's a spousal relationship, there has to be, that actual relationship has to exist. The abuser has to have that immigration status for this. I'll talk a little bit later about others where you don't need that status, but for the VAWA self-petition, the abuser has to have been in that lawful status, either lawful permanent resident or a USC. There has to have been joint residence. For spouses, it has to have been a good faith marriage. It can't have been solely for immigration purposes. And the person has to show that there is good moral character, which is my job and not yours, but we work on that with the. So the benefits. So in some jurisdictions or states, there's limited public benefits based on just having applied for this and received a prima facie determination that they are eligible, just a first review that they're eligible. Unfortunately, there are no benefits that Oregon provides for having received this, but in some other states they do. After they're approved, though, if they're otherwise eligible, they're able to apply for lawful permanent residence by themselves. Again, they don't need their abusive spouse or parent or child to be applying for them. They're able to apply for themselves. And it's a confidential process. And so even if somebody is moving through the normal immigration process with their abusive spouse, but say the spouse keeps, retracting the application or using that as a tool of control, which we see all the time, the survivor can be applying on their own separately, independently through this process on the side, which is kept confidential from the abuser. Okay, and so for spouses and children of U.S. citizens, they're immediately eligible to apply for that next step. And currently, because the priority date is current on that chart, spouses of lawful permanent residents and children are also eligible to apply right away, but that changes depending on how many applications have been filed over the years. Spouses and children of lawful permanent residents and their derivatives have to wait. That's what I was just explaining. Children can be included in their parent's self-petition, and once the application is approved, the initial application, they get deferred action status, which is most people have heard of it in the context of DACA, but deferred action status is something more generally in immigration law, which just generally protects the individual from being placed in removal proceedings. It's not permanent status. It doesn't mean that you can travel, but it means that they're qualified for work authorization. And in Oregon, that means that you can get you get work authorization, you can get a social security card, which means you can get a driver's license, which is really important to a lot of folks, especially for, those isolation issues, trying to maybe get some assistance from that or independence from the abusive situation. So now I'm going to talk about the U visa, which is a separate application from the VAWA self-petition. It's not based in the family system the way that the VAWA self-petition is based on the family petition process. The U visa is a temporary form of immigration status available to victims of certain serious crime who have cooperated with law enforcement and suffered as a result of the crime. And the purpose of the U visa, why it was created, it's twofold. Public safety. There were a lot of issues with trying to get information when there had been a crime committed. If law enforcement was going into immigrant communities and trying to get information about crime, people who were afraid of being put in removal proceedings, people who were afraid of law enforcement, perhaps from their previous experiences from their home countries, were not helpful in those investigations. And so that means that the people who were committing those crimes were sort of just walking free with impunity because there was nobody to talk to law enforcement. And so they created this to encourage reporting and cooperation with law enforcement, assist law enforcement with kind of getting people who are committing crimes in their own communities out of those situations. But then there's also the humanitarian purpose, which is to help domestic violence and other survivors of crime. In order to be eligible for a U visa, you have to be a victim of a qualifying crime. You have to have information about the crime and be helpful with the investigation. You have to prove substantial suffering as a result of the crime, but that doesn't mean you have to be permanently maimed. It's it can be emotional suffering, it can be physical suffering, it can be both, it can be any combination of those things. And then law enforcement has to certify that they were helpful. And law enforcement isn't responsible for saying the person suffered, just for determining that there was a crime and this person helped with the investigation or prosecution of that crime. So it's different from VAWA because there's no requirement that they have any kind of intimate or familial relationship between the perpetrator and the survivor. There's no requirement that the perpetrator have any kind of immigration status. They can be undocumented as well. And the third difference is that it takes much longer. Unfortunately, there's a statutory cap on the U visa that only 10,000 visas are available per year. And so at this point, almost 200,000 have been submitted. And so it's estimated that in applying for a U visa at this time, it's going to take more than 10 years to receive that benefit. But for many people, this is the only option that they have if they're undocumented or survivor of a serious crime or domestic violence, sexual assault. This might be their only avenue for asking for immigration relief. So here's a list of the criminal activity for U visas. And so the bolded ones are the ones we see the most, but generally you'll see that these are person crimes, right? They are generally violent crimes against people. It's not, you can't get a U visa if somebody steals your bike or your car, but it's generally violent or crimes against people. And also, I want to point out that it's any similar activity in violation of federal, state, or local criminal law. And so a lot of things that make someone eligible for a U visa aren't listed on here, but say one example is like the violation of a restraining order. And so that is the continuation of the domestic violence and the power and control, and violating that restraining order is showing that they're trying to continue that control and is part of that domestic violence. And so we would argue that that is substantially similar to domestic violence, and that person would likely be eligible for a U visa. So helpfulness to law enforcement, we usually help determine if somebody meets this criteria, but they just have to have been, the victim has been, is being, or will be helpful to a law enforcement agency. It can be at any point. So even if somebody is too afraid to speak to the police when they first arrive, because the abuser is standing right there, if they come later, give a report, help with the grand jury, all of that stuff, then we would argue that person was helpful. If they're under 16, they don't have to be helpful. And so the parent, guardian, or a next friend, which is essentially anybody who's acting on that person's behalf to help with the investigation, can be the person who's helpful. We see this a lot in child sexual abuse cases. They're too traumatized to assist, or they're unwilling to assist, or just unable. And so their parents can act on their behalf in the investigation, and that child would still be eligible for a U visa. The certifying agencies, federal, state, local law enforcement agencies, judges, prosecutors, anyone with the authority to investigate or prosecute qualifying crimes. Child Protective Services is listed as a qualifying certifying agency. Unfortunately, in Oregon, DHS chooses not to certify these, but EEOC and the Department of Labor also may certify with cases that come into contact with those agencies. Benefits. Once somebody has been approved, and right now we're seeing approvals from like 2015, so it takes a very long time. It doesn't take as long as it is going to take, but they are eligible for non-immigrant status, which is a temporary status, but it is an actual status for 4 years in the U.S. They're able to waive a majority of inadmissibility issues, which means things that they may have done in their immigration or criminal history that would make them ineligible to apply for any kind of immigration relief. With the U visa, there is a waiver and an opportunity to waive those things. They receive employment authorization, and then there's also the possibility that they can bring family members, and they can also, after 3 years in U visa status, they're eligible to apply for lawful permanent residence. So they can include derivatives. An adult U visa applicant can include a spouse, as long as it's not the abuser, and unmarried children under 21. And if you're under 21 at the time of filing, you can include your spouse as long as they're not the abuser. You can include your parents as long as they're not the abuser. And you can include your siblings who are under 18. And then derivatives can either be inside or outside of the country. So somebody could apply for children that they left in a home country, and then those children would be able to enter once their application is approved. The T visa, I'll review briefly. It's very similar to the U visa in its benefits. It's a form of temporary immigration relief like the U visa that's available for victims of severe form of human trafficking. And so this is for anyone who is the victim of either sex or labor trafficking. They're presently physically present in the United States on account of trafficking, which is something that we help them argue, even if they weren't brought into the country they weren't trafficked into the country. If they were trafficked once they were here, then they need to argue that they're still here on account of trafficking, which is something that we have them do. That they complied with reasonable requests for assistance in the investigation and prosecution of the trafficking crime, and that they would suffer extreme and unusual hardship if they were to return to their home country. The benefits are the same as the U visa: 4 years, they get employment authorization, they can bring family members, they can apply for permanent residence, and they can receive additional government benefits, including cash assistance, which is not an option with the U visa. The T visa is also much faster. Special immigrant juvenile status. And these are just sort of, not all of the forms of relief, and also not great detail, but it's just sort of wanting to let people know what is out there, so that if you come across somebody who might be eligible for one of these, that you can refer them to get a full consultation to see if they might be eligible. So special immigrant juvenile status is like, it helps undocumented children in the juvenile system obtain lawful immigration status, and they have to be under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court throughout the process. And that is something that if somebody isn't already under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court, if they're not in the foster system or in juvenile detention or one of those, in contact with the juvenile court, an attorney can ask for them to be put under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court. They have to be under 21 and unmarried throughout the process. And then the juvenile court judge has to determine the child is eligible for long-term foster care. They don't have to be in long-term foster care, but they just have to be eligible. Is not in the child's best interest to return to his or her home country, which the judge can decide on whatever they want, safety at home, nobody to take care of them, etc. And it's based on the abuse, abandonment, and neglect of the child by one or both of their parents. And so the judge, I usually see this when there's a red flag is like, if there's a child who doesn't have immigration status, who's living with an aunt or a grandma, who's not living with their parents, both of their parents, it at least is a question. Is this child maybe eligible for special immigrant juvenile status? If they're not, if they've been abandoned by one of their parents or neglected or abused by one of their parents, they may be eligible for this. And so that's just the flags that I like to kind of fly up if somebody comes into contact with a child like that. So just really quickly, because I'm running out of time, but sensitive locations, this is just some general information. And this is something that comes up sometimes, that people think that ICE or immigration enforcement aren't able to go into schools or medical treatment centers or places of worship or religious observances. It's not that they're not, but they do need to get special permission to go into them. So if folks see ICE in these places just sort of randomly picking people up, they should definitely report it. They are sort of protected, sensitive locations, but it's not that ICE can't go in there. There's no magic barrier or force field that keeps them out, but it is something to keep an eye on. Notario fraud is another thing I like to call out, because there are a lot of folks who, well-meaning or not, who want to help people with their immigration applications, either to make money or just because they speak the language and they want to be helpful to others in their community. But it's somebody who's not an attorney and they're not certified by the Department of Justice to assist with immigration applications. And it can be really damaging to the person's case. And as I mentioned, immigration is very complicated. And so it's really people really need to talk to somebody who is, has expertise in this area. And so what can you say if you come into contact with somebody who might be eligible? I would not, tell them that they're eligible for one of these things, but you can just say, I'm not an expert, but you should talk to somebody. Immigration cases are really complicated. You should talk to somebody. Oh, you sound like, you might want to check with an attorney to see if you might be eligible for a U visa or a VAWA self-petition. Or, who's helping you with your immigration case? Are they an attorney? Maybe give them some resources to somebody who's qualified. This is just, it's good to identify and refer folks, but not try and diagnose them or tell them what they might be eligible for. And this is their sort of analogy, like between medical diagnosis options and immigration diagnosis options. But you talk to a doctor, they give you good advice. It's more expensive, but it's usually right. If you look on the internet, it's going to tell you that you're definitely going to die. So we like people to get their immigration information from folks who know what they're talking about. And so making referrals to Catholic Charities, our rural program, if you come into contact with somebody who was a survivor in one of those rural counties, they can call this number, which is our mainline number, just extension 9. And our general program can help folks all over the state. And this is our number, and we do consultations for $50. And then other nonprofits who also do immigration work. And if somebody wants a private attorney, it's best to go with somebody who's a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, because they're more likely to have experience in this area.
Awesome.
That's it.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And if anybody does have questions, please do email them to capsupport@ohsu.edu. I'm getting an echo. Okay. So yeah, if anybody else has any questions, please just email them at capsupport@ohsu.edu. I did get one question. So in the last 5 minutes, and I think it doesn't state which presenters specifically this is for. So if you all have an answer, I just want to make sure that we have time for that. But if an immigrant, refugee, or undocumented survivor receives CVC, which crime victim compensation benefits, does that impact if DHS considers them a public charge, quote unquote, especially in light of the most recent rule changes? And now that I'm reading that out loud, it kind of sounds more like a question for Sarah, if that makes sense. But I don't know, Sarah, you tell me, or Sue and Marie, like you raise a hand or something to help with this as well. But Sarah, I'm gonna let you jump in.
Yeah, I don't, I mean, this might be a question for Sue and Marie also, because they work more with, I assume, helping folks with the crime victims compensation. And I honestly don't know off the top of my head. I would assume that it doesn't affect the public charge issue because, like emergency services or things that are related to domestic violence generally don't. But Sue or Marie, do you have an answer, a solid answer on that one?
For the training we have from our immigration services, the crime victim compensation, it doesn't count.
Okay, thanks for reiterating that. That's really helpful. And I was totally wrong. I know nothing. I just thought it had something to do with legal stuff, and I was like, oh, the person who just spoke on legal stuff would have the answer, and instead the advocates are like, nope, as usual, here we are, advocates with an answer. Thanks, y'all. I really appreciate you working together on that. If we have any more questions that come through email, I'll probably just follow up with you all individually and get answers from our speakers and then email them out to the group. And we're kind of leaning towards the end of our webinar, and I'll be emailing everyone the evaluation, the recording, any follow-up materials from our speakers today. And I just want to really, really thank everyone for being here and for both Sue and Marie's time with IRCO and Sarah's time just now as well with Catholic Charities. And if anyone joined just now for the end while Sarah was speaking, IRCO spoke at the start, and I'd encourage you to watch the full recording of today's webinar, or representatives with IRCO rather, spoke at the start. So yeah, we'll be emailing out the recording from today. And yeah, if you all need information on the confidential advocacy program at OHSU, you can visit our website, ohsu.edu/cap. We'll be doing more of these webinars. There's another one coming up in August and 2 more in September as well. And yeah, I really appreciate everyone's time today. And thank you for all of our presenters and all of your lovely knowledge and bringing it to this space. And thank you, Stacy, for running the hotline and watching our emails, and to everyone who sent us some questions and engaged with us today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Really appreciate it, and for supporting our team. Yeah, thank you so much.